Been a couple of months since the last top 10 CTP video, and in that time we've gotten a brand new CTP, the CTP of competition. So I'm going to be adding it to the list, of course, but I'm also going to be approaching these CTPs in a little bit of a different way moving forward, particularly since the last two CTPs to be introduced, the Liberation and now the competition, have really shifted the games and the players' focus, because with the Liberation it competed directly with Insight, and players ultimately realized that you kind of want a little bit of this and a little bit of that. In the similar way, the CTP of competition doesn't replace the Rage, but rather works alongside it, replacing some of the characters for the Rage, but not all of them. And the list is not even, completely one rule or another. There are exceptions, which we'll get to. So it really begs the question, should there actually be any overlap with these lists? And so what I tried to do, and that's why the list is late, and that's why it took longer to make than usual, is I tried to make as little overlap as possible. So I want to show you as many characters as possible. There are now 12 CTPs that I cover in this video, because I no longer cover Transcendence, I no longer cover Patience, and I don't cover Veteran. I never have. But the remaining 12 CTPs, I'm trying to show you 10 different characters. So it's not perfect, I'm still getting there, but the goal is to recommend essentially 120 characters, because 10 for each CTP. Okay, so we're gonna kick it off with the CTP of Regen. This is one of the worst CTPs right now in the game, besides the ones that we don't already cover. It is a PvP CTP, but it is lacking in what makes a PvP CTP good these days. It doesn't have Super Guard Break immunity, which is mandatory, and then the healing and stuff is just not very good. So honestly, these days it needs to be reforged, sure, but these days I see this CTP as you wanted as basically a placeholder for a Liberation or an Insight. And so you can see by the list, there's a lot of support characters. There's a couple that are not support characters, like Gladiator, thanks to Commander's testing a while ago. But a lot of them are support characters, right? Especially Victorious, Sleeper, Franklin, And essentially, when you use a Mighty Regen or a Brilliant Regen these days, it's for characters that you would prefer to give a support CTP, like a Mighty or Brilliant Liberation, Mighty or Liberant Insight, but you just don't have them. Okay, all of these characters here, besides maybe Gladiator, would just be straight up better in their roles as PvP supports with an Insight or a Liberation. But if you don't have one, you give them a Regeneration. But for anyone wondering, oh, can I put Regen on Sentry, or it's going to be really good on Null, or, Adam Warlock, it's really bad. It's really bad. It's obvious. It's like it's better than an Obelisk in some cases, but it's really, really bad. And you're going to get destroyed. And then you're going to have to still spend 300 crystals later, or 450 crystals later, on equipping it during a discount to then give them an actual good PvP CTP, like a Greed or a Conquest. This is not a PvP CTP anymore. It's just bad. The Energy CTP, while not needing to be reforged, does benefit a little bit from it. But again, this is probably one of the areas where you're going to see the most overlap between characters, essentially because it's just not a very good CTP these days. What's happened with World Boss Legend and World Boss Legend Plus is that they've continued to scale the defenses behind the scenes of the bosses. And so even if you have 25% pierce, or even if you reforge an energy and you have, a 35% pierce, and you have an extra 10% pierce from the Team Collection, 45% pierce, that's still not enough. Right, because 45% pierce is 45% true damage, but the Rage and the competition ignore 60-70% of the boss's defense. Would you rather deal 45% true damage or ignore 70% of the boss's defense? Yeah, okay, you can see which number is bigger. Right, 70 is almost double 45. So, and 45 is in the best case. So unfortunately, yeah, the CTP of Energy just does not keep up with these other CTPs. And so you're just seeing characters who are either used in a pseudo support role, like Black Widow as a striker for ABX, and using her with an energy there. You see a sort of like hybrid PvE PvP with someone like Adam. If you can't afford or you don't have access to greeds, you can give him an energy. If you're specifically climbing stages with Wolverine, energy can be good there. And then I added in Emma because she's super proc friendly, and also Reed if you just want to use them in PvE content, you don't have extra rages, and you don't want to use them in PvP, you want to use them in PvE, they can actually work. But yeah, overall, this list and this CTP, like the Regen, is in desperate need of buffs. The CTP of Destruction needs to be reforged. The list is remaining mostly the same, so there is overlap from last time, and there is overlap with characters like, you know, you just saw Gamora and Sharon, but also you'll see Captain America and Hela again. I added Bishop to the list because he needs the penetration specifically for PvP, but otherwise, yeah, this CTP is kind of just in an awkward place. The increased damage to boss types is nice. The strike proc giving you, I believe it's ignore dodge as well, is nice, but again, it just doesn't compete at these very, very high stages of World Boss Legend Plus, because you need to ignore so much of the boss's defense, right? The boss's defense. And so that kind of precludes it from being good at very, very, very high stages. It can still be good for lower stages of World Boss Legend, so it can still help you climb through Null, Mephisto, Ultron, etc. But once you start getting into, you know, Black Swan, once you start getting into Corvus, Ebony, and Thanos, you'll see the Destruction CTP's value and sort of performance drop off once you climb out of stage like 9. The Authority CTP needs to be reforged, and you're aiming for that steel proc. And what I want to highlight here is how many speed characters I've picked for this CTP. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 speed characters. Now, Silver Surfer here is just playing a sort of placeholder role for any Reflect character. So Silver Surfer is the best of them, but there's also the rest of them. So there's Shalabal, there's Destroyer, there's a bunch of other Reflect characters to a lesser extent like Luke Cage and stuff like that. They can all use an Authority because it gives them that stopgap where, you know, once they take a chunk of damage, they will get Super Guard Break immunity, they'll get invincibility, etc. There is more minutia involved when you look at which skills characters spam. If they spam an invincibility skill, then an Authority doesn't help them as much. If the skill that they spam or the skill that's their iframe ignore is damage immunity instead of invincibility, then this can be really good because it'll give them invincibility and immunity at the same time. But that being said, the reason why so many speed characters are on this list, this is a weaker CTP. It's not as good as the Greed. It's not as good as the Conquest. But it does, you know, give a lot of defense, right? With the Steel proc, with the Super Guard Break immunity, with the invincibility. And speed characters are often missing survivability, right? So allowing a character like, for example, Daredevil, who just wants to spam the 3rd skill, maybe he gets 1/3 skill off right at the beginning, and then he takes a big chunk of damage because he's a speed type, he doesn't have any defense or HP. Then the Steel proc kicks in, the invincibility kicks in, and that stalls long enough for him to get another 3rd skill. Whereas if you know, a Conquest, Conquest just is straight up better than Authority, right, Alex? Well, yes and no. The reason why the Authority is good in this case is because it guarantees, right, as soon as your HP is below 50%, or if you have a different role and it's below 40%, you get the invincibility, right? As soon as that happens. It doesn't matter if it's 1 hit or it's 5 hits or it's 10 hits. With the Conquest, you're waiting for that wall proc to activate. But with the wall proc, it builds up, right, based on your concentration, based on the hits you're taking. If you're getting chunked for 40% of your HP on every hit, doom, 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 you're dead. 3 hits, you're dead. The Conquest doesn't proc, right? Or it procs too late. You're at 10% HP. You can't recover. You know what I mean? So it's not saying that the Authority is better than these other CTPs, but if the character is kind of like a one-trick, they're kind of just there to just pop one attack and then pop it again, then these CTPs, the Authority CTP, can be better or can be useful in certain situations. And so that's what I've tried to highlight with characters like Wong, with characters like Elektra, with characters like Quicksilver, is they're just there to essentially spam one skill if they're not there to reflect like Silver Surfer, and to a much lesser extent Ancient One is. The Judgment CTP doesn't need to be reforged, but it certainly helps with the type amplification. You will see some overlap here on the list, but I've tried to highlight characters more so for like World Boss Legend and other content besides ABX ABL, because we know the Judgment CTP doesn't work well there. In certain cases, for characters like Ghost Rider, they can also be, you know, claim like a hybrid role. I did bring back Namor from the depths of despair here, just to highlight a wider range of elemental damage characters. Not going to be so good on the newer world bosses. So like we sort of said, for energy and destruction, the CTP doesn't hold up as well when you climb into the really high stages, unless you have a Brilliant. You really need that type amplification to be as high as possible. But it can still do very, very well on like the first 6, even the first 7 bosses. But of course, it's sort of like, you know, the higher you climb and the further the boss, the less value you get, because you're not getting that that defense ignore that you would get from you know, a boss defense ignore that you get from a rage or a competition. The Refinement CTP, aka the egg, needs to be reforged. You're going for the vitality proc. Remember that the vitality proc does give you access to super guard break immunity, so it can be good. But generally speaking, what separates this one from the authority is that this is for characters who can be tanky on their own, and you want to make them even tankier. Authority is for characters who are not tanky and need a little bit of tankiness defense. So here you're going to see a lot of characters that have tons of HP. You see a lot of combat types with Carnage, excuse me, Hulk, Captain America. You see characters that have, you know, damage ignore, damage like reduction, like Black Swan and X-23. You also see some reflect pylons like Shala Ball and Emma Frost. And then you see a couple of other ones in there. So this is basically, you know, a tankier version, a much tankier, much better version of something like a regen. And that's why, you know, you're not going to see the overlap there between those characters, because I want to highlight kind of better PvP characters versus kind of like worse PvP characters. You wouldn't use this in place of a support CTP on these characters because they're good enough to actually impact your roster with a refinement. Maybe not Yelena, I'll be honest. She's probably the odd one out here. But again, it's tough to find 120 characters. So this list is still going to need some improvement, some refinement, if you will. So forgive me for that one. If you have a better suggestion, obviously leave it down below in the comments if it's not duplicated anywhere else. But yeah, the refinement is not a bad CTP. Just remember that it's mostly going to be effective on characters that are already tanky. And if the character is not tanky, this unfortunately will not just make them tanky. The Greed CTP needs to be reforged. You're aiming for the ambush proc, and this is where you start to see the heavyweights, the juggernauts of PvP in Marvel Future Fight, is where you're going to see the usefulness of Greed and Conquest really shoot up. Now, obviously, you can recommend, like, I can recommend 30 characters for the CTP. It is very, very good for PvP, mainly if the character either is very tanky or has access to immortality or revive. There you go. Now, you're obviously going to have varying levels of success. Wolverine is a lot tankier than Black Widow. So for Black Widow, you're going to need to put a lot more into her build in order for the Greed to work, because, again, the ambush proc charges as you get hit. So you got to take that into consideration. If you're getting chunked down, you're not going to get many procs of the ambush effect. You're not going to, you know, really be able to reap the benefits of this because it's just got a minor heal there. And then it's got, of course, all the damage. This is a very, very offensive-oriented CTP. That's why you see it paired with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 characters that have immortality. Yeah, 7 out of 10 here have immortality. 2 others have revive. And then one of them is Black Widow. Again, in a way, the odd bird out, but it can work in limited circumstances. Works much better when you pair her with Agent Venom, which allows you then to get access to more survivability, which then gives you more ambush procs. The Liberation CTP and the Insight CTP are inextricably linked, but you want to kind of separate the characters that you use each of them on so you don't experience overlap. So as you'll see from this Liberation list here and from this Insight list here, there is no overlap. I'm not going to spend too long talking about why you use each character in each one. It doesn't necessarily matter. You can mix and match as you wish. Just bear in mind for yourself, you're going to have to keep track if you're not using somebody else's list or somebody else's sort of, you know, web. You're going to have to keep track of which characters have which. Because then, for example, if you gave Yondu an Insight, and then you gave Groot an Insight, oops, I'm using Groot and Yondu with Gladiator for ABL, I'm not reaping the full benefit. So now I have to swap out either Yondu's or Groot's for a Liberation, for example, if you wanted to fully saturate these characters for PvP or PvE content with both CTPs. Generally speaking, it's more of a PvE thing to saturate with both Insight and Liberation. Most of the time you can't, you can't bring 2 supports essentially into PvP. I tried it for the Fantastic Four, giving Invisible Woman Liberation and Franklin Insight, and it didn't really work. So yeah, it's mostly a PvE thing, keep that in mind, but it can work in some situations for like Team Battle Arena, for example, for certain PvP setups. The CTP of Rage, the most popular PvE CTP. This is where things get interesting because now we're separating out, with particular focus on ABX, ABL, characters who can leverage the Rage more effectively versus characters who can't, and thus will migrate and sort of naturally trend towards the competition. So if you're wondering why you're not seeing certain characters here, where are these characters that I know are really good for Rage, Alex? You told me 2 months ago they were good for Rage. Yes, but they're actually better for competition. And the main reason for that, the main explanation is that, remember, the Rage triggers when you deal a critical attack. When you critically attack, it's 20% chance to activate the Rage. However, Rage, crit rate caps at 75%. The boss has crit defense, so guaranteed crit rate gives you that extra roll, that extra chance to crit. And so these characters here that you're seeing, they have guaranteed crit rate for the most part. I believe Thor is the only one that doesn't have guaranteed crit rate, maybe Gambit, but I checked the rest of them. They should all have guaranteed crit rate. And so that allows them to consistently proc the Rage without interruption. I believe actually Gladiator doesn't have guaranteed crit rate, but he has a lot of hits. So that is why these characters are used for Rage. If we go and take a look at competition, and with competition you preferably want it to be reforged to get that Fury proc. But with competition, what you'll see is these characters don't, for the most part, they don't have guaranteed crit rate. So, Hulk doesn't have guaranteed crit rate, Jean doesn't have guaranteed crit rate, Luna, Storm, Thanos, they don't have Ghost Rider, they don't have guaranteed crit rate. So sometimes when you're playing these characters, and you can see it especially on characters like Luna, is you're hitting, you're doing your skills, and the Rage proc is not activating. And you're like, huh, what's going on? Well, she's not critting. That's where the competition comes in. And that's where there is sort of like a separation. It's not that the competition is just replacing Rage 1-for-1. It's that there's now going to be a sort of separation. And so the devs realized that for the PvE characters, not all of them had guaranteed crit rate. And it was genuinely frustrating at times to play with Luna, and it still is because I haven't switched my Luna over to a competition, with a Rage. And that goes for some of these other characters as well. There is one character on this ranking who does have guaranteed crit rate. That's Venom. He has 30%. But what I've heard from other people's testing is that he's actually still just better with a competition. For however that makes sense, he is just better with a competition. So the other characters on this list don't have guaranteed crit rate. Most of them are used and can be used for ABX, ABL, especially the first 5 or the first 4. I put in Thanos there, Farmer Thanos, because I know some of you out there have refused to switch to Loki. You don't build Thanos for PvE, and so you use him for PvE to allow you to use Null for PvP. So a competition would also be better on him. He does have a lot of hits with Farmer Thanos' uniform, but again, no guaranteed crit rate, meaning the competition should perform better, as good or better, under similar circumstances with similar roles. Right? I'm not saying that a regular competition on these characters is going to be better than a Mighty Rage. Right? We talked about this on the live stream. Some people asking me, "Oh, is a Mighty competition better than a Brilliant Rage, Alex?" No, guys. You always got to compare things 1-to-1. So a regular competition is going to be better than a regular Rage for these characters. A Mighty competition is going to be better than a Mighty Rage for these characters, and Brilliant to Brilliant. But we don't, it doesn't filter between levels. And so we come to the Conquest CTP. This one needs to be reforged. It needs that Clash proc there on the top that increases your damage. And this is sort of the other side of the heavyweight PvP meta. Again, you will see overlap and repeated characters. I apologize. I know the first 5, the first 6 or 7 have been repeated quite a few times. But we also have Spider-Man making his first appearance. We have Reed again. And then we have Shalabal. This is basically the perennial PvP CTP. This is the best PvP CTP overall. And you can't really, deny it because it has everything. It has guard break immunity. It has super guard break immunity with the Clash proc. The Clash proc gives you increased damage. And then it also heals you. It also increases your max HP, and it gives you damage reduction. Oh, and it gives you recovery rate, and it gives you guard break immunity. Yeah, it gives you literally everything. So if you could give every character a Mighty or a Brilliant Conquest for CTP, for PvP, you're great. You're in really great shape. Unfortunately, nobody has that. Well, maybe there are some whales out there. I don't know. There's some deep sea krakens that remain undisturbed. I apologize, but for the majority of us, this is just not possible. So you want to reserve these CTPs, these conquests, for your absolute best, so that they can perform at the very highest level. Alternatively, some people like to do the reverse. It's your game. You can absolutely play it however you want. I'm just here to help you if possible, or give you advice, give you tips that I've picked up from the community, etc., my own experiences. And yeah, if that's helpful, great. If it's not, great. So that's the list there. That's all the CTPs that I want to cover that are worth covering these days. We may move to a list in the future that doesn't include some of the very, very weak ones like Regeneration. But for the time being, I want to get your feedback and let me know what you think of the list, what you think of the goal now to try to have no overlap. Is it good? Is it not good? Hit me up in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the content. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.